Motion for debate. Mobile phone-free schools. Baroness Kidron.
My Lords, it's a privilege to open today's debate, and I'm grateful to all noble lords who've chosen to speak. I look forward to the maiden speech of my noble friend Baroness Cass, who's done so much for children in a long career of paediatric medicine, including as president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. Her voice is very welcome in this debate, and her presence will undoubtedly enrich the work of the House. I declare my interest on the register, particularly as Chair of Five Rights Foundation and Chair of the Digital Futures for Children's Research Centre at the LSE, and contributor to the DFC's report about smartphones in schools. My Lords, the issue of smartphones in schools should be straightforward. School is for learning, for building relationships, for personal development, acquiring skills such as sports, debating, drama, and so on. The academic literature shows smartphones interrupt that learning, and as a report from the library note records, the same finite pool of attentional resources supports both the attentional control and other cognitive processes. Resources recruited to inhibit automatic attention to one's phone are made unavailable for other tasks, and performance on these tasks will suffer. My Lords, in more straightforward language, a phone unused on a desk diverts attention that is unavailable for learning. Government guidance published earlier this year is also unequivocal. In the introduction by the then Secretary of State, Gillian Keegan, it says, mobile phones risk unnecessary distraction, disruption and diversion. 1 in 3 secondary school pupils report that mobile phones are used in most lessons without permission. This not only distracts the single pupil, but disrupts the lesson for the whole class and diverts teachers' efforts away from learning. My Lords, there are calls for further research, but the evidence we already have indicates that restricting personal devices benefits learning, with a particular benefit accruing to those identified as disadvantaged or struggling academically. And my Lords, this is an important point, because advocating for phone restrictions in schools is sometimes characterized as a middle-class moral panic. My Lords, the evidence suggests otherwise. So inasmuch as phones are a distraction or a barrier to the opportunities and activities that school offer, they have no place in school. But for those who still doubt, let me add 4 further points. First is the case of Singapore. In 2020, the Ministry of Education announced it would embrace smartphones in school and invest in devices for students who could not afford them, simultaneously promoting wide-ranging digital literacy education and teacher training. But in October this year, Singapore's Straits Times reported widespread misuse of those devices, with one parent discovering their 13-year-old son had spent more than 3 hours on apps such as YouTube and TikTok and just 13 seconds on Google Classroom, prompting public calls to restrict personal devices in school, and indeed some schools already have done so. Second, research from Policy Exchange this year found that schools with an effective ban on smartphones were more than twice as likely to be rated outstanding by Ofsted. There may be other contributing factors, but nonetheless, one of the characteristics of an outstanding school is effective smartphone restrictions. Third, those schools who have had well-managed restrictions talk of culture change. Ellie, a Five Rights Young advisor, said, because it was banned for everyone, there was no judgment for not having a phone, and it was a lot easier to foster communication with everyone. And a head teacher, quoted in government guidance, said, pupils have headspace and calm environment to learn, and staff have the quiet and focus to teach. My Lords, it's not simply about learning, it's about building a respectful and communicative school community. And fourth, and possibly most importantly, children know that they are distracted. A 2019 survey of 3,000 children reported 45% who found their phone distracting at school. My lords, in algorithmic terms, 2019 is the dark ages. It marks the earliest days of TikTok's For You page algorithm, dubbed TikTok's secret sauce by tech journalist Alex Hearn, which we now know because of disclosures prompted by legal action by 14 US states' attorney generals, that the For You page algorithm is so powerful that a new user can become addicted in less than 35 minutes. Noble lords will note that I have not used the word ban, because there are times when smartphones are necessary. There are medical reasons, for example, children with diabetes who use the phone to manage blood sugar. There are services that support children with certain learning difficulties. There are pedagogical and PSHE reasons for having a phone in class, and some vulnerable children or children with caring duties need real-time access to communication. Each of these are acknowledged in government guidance, and each should form part of phone restriction policies in schools. Government may argue that the current guidance is so comprehensive and sensible, which it is, that no further action is needed. But, my lords, an estimated 37% of schools do not have a comprehensive restriction in place, and DFC's own research found that 20% of secondary school pupils reported mobile phones in most lessons without permission. And up and down the country, safeguarding leads ask for more robust support to manage harmful behaviours and phone-fuelled conflicts. Optional guidance is not fair to children whose learning experiences are interrupted, or to teachers trying to enforce voluntary policies with little support. Putting the guidance on statutory footing would mean all schools are subject to restrictions, flexible enough for educators who understand the context and the circumstances on the ground to be the final arbiter of when and if having a smartphone is in the best interest of teacher, class, or child. It would also place a duty on government to ensure every school was supported and resourced to implement the policy and ensure that the impacts were monitored and reported. My lords, since Pavlov's conditioning response experiments with dogs in the 1890s, we have understood that the brain can be trained to respond to small increments of dopamine that fuel a craving for more. The tech sector sinks billions of dollars into creating persuasive design strategies that keep children seeking the next opportunity to text, swipe, post, respond. Their distraction is neither an act of willful disobedience nor an unforeseen consequence, but a direct result of the priorities of a sector that openly exploits human psychology and cognitive function to grab attention. It does not matter if it is the toxic views of Andrew Tate or the seemingly innocent act of filling a shopping basket and leaving it full at checkout. The real cost of the attention economy, set out starkly in the briefing from health professionals for safer screens, is being paid by children who have poorer eyesight, inhibited speech and language development, interrupted sleep, and rising rates of anxiety and other mental health issues. Smartphone restrictions don't just protect the sanctity of schools as places of learning and personal development, they offer kids a much-needed break. Which brings me to the broader question of tech in our schools. Despite academics, campaigners, and even UNESCO raising the alarm, the DfE increasingly allows edtech designed on the same reward loop principles with unproven pedagogical values and poor privacy practices into the classroom. In one case, a parent refused to consent to her son's use of Google Classroom and found, to her horror, that he'd been consigned to a separate room with a teaching assistant while his classmates, headphones on, were busy researching things on YouTube. In short order, she reversed her decision so that he could be a full member of a class taught by a trained teacher. But her choice was between having an 8-year-old on Google Classroom with its extractive personal data practices and direct links to commercial and age-restricted services, or her child being, in effect, sent to detention. My lords, the DfE has been very unresponsive to concerns about technology for learning, for school management and for safety, including attempts to tell them that many of the monitoring and filtering products in our schools are unable to monitor generative AI. This lack of responsiveness is exacerbated by DSIT's determination that digital protections do not apply in school settings, ironically giving a child more protections on the bus to school than when they arrive in the building. This lack of coherence across home and school has created a palpable increase of tensions between teachers and parents. Teachers exasperated that children come to school tired and wired after nights scrolling and gaming, often on products and services that outstrip a child's capacity to understand or navigate them, while parents are frustrated that homework must be uploaded. Services they do not understand or would rather their child didn't use are required to complete teacher-directed tasks. And many feel that children spend far too much time online during the school day. A recent letter from Early Years for Digital Standards Action Group to the DfE raised the alarm on how little departmental and regulatory focus is on nursery-age children, citing the routine use of YouTube and passive screen time, the rise in cases of inhibited development and access to harmful content, and the lack of digital literacy for teachers and parents in early year settings. I'm talking about children 0 to 5. My lords, we need clearer standards for all tech in educational settings, both how it is designed and how it is used. And it is time for the Department of Education and DSIT to concede that digital world is seamless and that children of all ages in all settings need equal consideration. My lords, before I conclude, I want to briefly raise the banning of social media for under 16s altogether, as the Australians have proposed and indeed passed today. There are practical issues of what falls in that definition. It's unclear if it means anything with social elements, which would include Google Classroom and many e-commerce and entertainment sites. Should it include services with persuasive design features or gaming? Will it push children in darker, worse parts of the digital world? And of course, what happens when the full force of the tech sector's offer floods in on a child's 16th birthday? My lords, if I had a school-aged child, I may well be among the 58% of UK parents who support a social media ban for under 16. And I would certainly be among the 69% who say it would make their lives easier. But we are living in a time where you cannot apply for a university, a job, or a benefit without being online. When the spectre of living alongside intelligent machines is more likely than not. And whatever your professional vocation, you will need digital understanding. The only reason that we would ban children from accessing this new world is because we, here in Parliament, in government, and in our regulators, have spectacularly failed to deliver on the promise that tech would be held to account. It is both inequitable and impractical to ask parents and children to supervise a ban if we continue to allow companies to create deliberately addictive and toxic products in their race for children's attention. My lords, I believe we will look back on this time and will regret the generations of children that we failed to protect on our watch. The least we can do is give some effective respite at school. I look forward to the noble lady's response, but I must say, failing to send a minister from DfE is disrespectful to the anguish that so many parents feel and the lack of support expressed by teachers and safeguarding leads. I hope the noble lady will not restrict her comments to existing guidance, but will address each of the issues I've raised and undertake to take ministers from both DSET and DFE to the House to discuss a path forward on each. I beg to move.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
My Lords, it's always a pleasure, as it was last week, to follow the noble Baroness Kidron, and I too look forward to the maiden speech of the noble Baroness Cass. My Lords, smartphones are addictive by design. The messaging, the notifications, the social media likes, we get trapped into behaviours that produce dopamine that give us short-term pleasure hits, and thereby the behaviour patterns become addictive. This shift in behaviour is especially distracting and potentially damaging for children. But we as adults are as addicted as our children. I can look around this chamber every day and see up to half of your lordships looking at their phones. I can't therefore look a young person in the eye and tell them that we are banning their phones when we're just as addicted as they are. My 13-year-old has learnt to be an independent traveller, commuting 45 minutes each way to school on the P4 bus, or taking a train on her own to see Auntie Sandy in Cardiff. None of that would be possible without the messaging and the travel information on her phone. Her homework is set on her phone, as is her music, as is the information on the web to support learning and the app to help her calm down when she becomes overwrought. So how should we protect children as parents and policymakers whilst teaching and modelling positive smartphone behaviour? I don't think it's appropriate for primary school-aged children to have phones. And parents should be encouraged to limit their phone use around young children as much as possible. This is an important time for children to learn positive social and emotional behaviour and not be constantly babysat by screens. Ofcom should robustly use its powers under the Online Safety Act to ensure that social media companies abide by their own terms and conditions, keep under-13s off their platforms, protect children from porn and the range of harms that we legislated against. Ideally, it should be easier for parents to restrict content on their children's devices using their Wi-Fi router settings and local device management. Whilst I do that at home, I recognise that not everyone is as tech curious or capable to do the same. There is a need for the connectivity providers and for Apple and Google to make that easier for parents. In our home, we've also agreed a digital code of conduct as a family back when Coco was just 8. No phones in bedrooms at night, no tech at meals, no sharing pictures online without consent. We all have to comply. As parents, we also limit her to one social media app at any given time. Her current choice is Pinterest to help her with her art at school. And all apps are downloaded with my approval. Incidentally, WhatsApp counts as social media, and she therefore has to navigate her social life without the traumas meted out on that platform by other users. But what about schools? My preference would be for a ban on phones in primary schools, but for secondaries, I'm attracted to the technology used by the John Wallace Academy in Ashford, as an example. Children place their phones in lockable pouches and lock them as they enter school, where they are welcomed and checked by teachers. The pouches block the phone signal and can only be unlocked using a similar device to that used to remove security tags from clothes in shops. This is an elegant solution. The distraction of phones is eliminated. It's relatively straightforward for the school to do, but it allows for phones to be unlocked for learning if that is what a teacher wants to do. Because we do also need to find room in the timetable for media literacy, perhaps by teaching journalism, teaching how to create good audio, video and text using phones, how to research and critically think, how algorithms are manipulated and manipulate you in turn, teaching how the business models of free services work on your phone and what you're giving away in exchange. This is learning we all need as teachers, parents and children. So to finish, my lords, this is a shared responsibility between home and school. Our digital consumption, like sugar, is addictive. We need to consider what is healthy, As a family, we choose the rules to ensure we don't become digitally obese and to ensure we consume the right things and that we treat one another with respect, trust, individuality, collaboration and kindness in the digital world. It's on all of us.
My Lords, I was genuinely in two minds about contributing to this important debate due to the expertise that exists in our chamber, not least from the noble Baroness Kidron, whose work on online harms is renowned and her reputation well deserved. I am particularly looking forward to the maiden speech of Baroness Cass, whose recent authoritative report I would publicly like to applaud. But as a grandma of 3 grandchildren, I am already concerned about their screen time. And before diving into the murky pool of politics, I was pastoral head of a large comprehensive school where I was responsible for child protection and safeguarding. And to me, this is a safeguarding issue. Even then, I had begun to notice increases in mental health issues. Things that were rare were becoming common. And my son recommended that I read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. My Lords, his main tenet was that 2 factors have created within Generation Z to create this anxious generation: the overprotection of young people in the real world and the underprotection of them in the virtual world. Light bulb moment, everything fell into place. My Lords, there is now a significant body of authoritative data that shows that depression, anxiety and other mental health issues are on the increase in young people. There also seems to be a growing consensus that the use of smartphones has and continues to be a major contributing factor to this. The kids are definitely not all right. Health professionals for safer screens are very clear that the risks are overwhelming, increasing and outweigh any benefits. This is a sit up and take notice statement. And to be fair, some parents are doing just that. Parentkind, in their informative briefing, told us that 8 in 10 parents say that smartphones are harmful to young people, and 7 in 10 saying that limiting access to smartphones would make life easier for them as parents. We are now faced with having accepted this wonderful new technology that we all love and I confess to being addicted to, with its very many positives, but without the concrete knowledge about the impact on our children until now. Apparently, older teens spend at least 8 hours a day in front of a screen, teenage boys more than girls, and even 8 to 10-year-olds at least 6 hours a day. 8 hours in a day is an enormous amount of time that could and should, in my view, be spent on personal and social development in the real world. Instead, they become passive consumers of other people's curated worlds, giving them a very poor representation of reality. I believe that allowing children several hours a day without phone distractions is a good thing of itself, and it would break the addictive cycle that is associated with excessive use. It is no surprise to me that there has been a rise of those youngsters with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and inability to keep focus. Clear restrictions on phones in school would send a very clear message to parents that excessive phone use causes demonstrable harms, harms that in the real world they are seeking to protect their children from. Schools are best placed to take on that educative role for students and to empower parents to take back control in the home. And the evidence that shows that many schools are doing that. I feel that a school's leadership team should be able to decide how to make such restrictions work and make exceptions. But the key question you're asking is, should it be mandated? I believe it should be seriously considered. It is illegal for youngsters to buy alcohol, other drugs, and to gamble. Most parents would not be happy if their child had a bottle of vodka or a bag of weed in their school bag. But the phone sits there, capable of creating the same cravings, desires, and subsequent addiction. That bothers me greatly.
Yeah. Could I briefly remind the contributors, noble lords, that the speaking time is 4 minutes. Can you please stick to it so we can finish the debate in time? Thank you.
My lords, I would also like to thank my noble friend Lady Kidron for securing this important debate, and I too am greatly looking forward to the maiden speech of Baroness Cass. In case anybody has never met me and don't know that I am a state secondary school teacher in Hackney. I would also like to thank all the organisations that sent briefings about online, but most of them were about online safety. I'm going to confine my remarks about the topic of smartphones in schools. As we've heard, the Parent survey found that 83% of all parents say that smartphones are harmful to young people. I disagree. I love smartphones. Due to some rather complex arrangements, I have 3 13-year-olds in my household, and they use smartphones to keep in touch, to play games, to organise their sporting activities, do homework, talk to friends, and equally importantly, talk to relatives at home and abroad. To take a smartphone away from them, or take a smartphone away from a secondary school pupil, is to isolate them almost totally and to stigmatise them. Now, I think smartphones are great, but not in schools. In 10 years of teaching, I have never taught in a school that allows mobile phones, and I hope I never do. The original school where I trained, St George's in Westminster, was one of the first state schools to ban mobile phones in schools, because in December 1995, a mobile phone call from the school summoned a gang that ended up killing the head teacher, Philip Lawrence. My present school, where I teach, Mossbourne Community Academy, doesn't allow phones for students under 16, for all the obvious reasons, but one of the most important being that our students wear distinctive uniforms. They're not allowed to carry cash as well. It makes them not worth mugging, which is always a risk in our part of Hackney. Students who are seen with a phone or in a shop-in-school uniform are severely punished. It is also amazing how a cashless, phoneless walk home can reduce the desire for a little like shoplifting or to take revenge on social media. The worry we have from parents is about the journey home. Our pupils have to go the most direct route home after school, so parents know when to expect them. Any detentions, sports fixtures or clubs are written in advance in their planners, an A5 diary that students will have at them at all times. If a public transport is delayed, pupils are told to seek a responsible-looking adult and politely ask if they could send a message home telling them what's happened. Now, the Carers Trust talk of the importance of young carers needing a phone to stay in contact. I would say, as we've already said, it's much more important to give young carers time and space for their education, safe in the knowledge that if there's an emergency, they can be contacted. And any school wanting to ban phones must have an efficient system to get a message through to students when they're needed. Plans change, we all know that. The only exception, I would say, is medical conditions, as Baroness Kidron said. Diabetes UK make a very sensible point that diabetes management is now mainly through an app, and so all of these should be part of an individual healthcare plan. I agree that it's vital that children use the latest technology to manage serious medical conditions. My lords, we've survived many thousands of years without smartphones in schools. Why do we need them now?
My lords, it's an honour to take part in this debate. I congratulate Baroness Kidron on her excellent introduction, and with others, look forward very much to the maiden speech of Baroness Cass. The Diocese of Oxford, where I serve, has 285 church schools. So we share in the education of somewhere over 60,000 children through the church schools and the network of multi-academy trusts. There's a very broad consensus on the importance of this issue and in favour of smartphone-free schools. but not yet final consensus on the next steps to bring this about. The consensus arises from our commitment to follow the Christian values of wisdom, respect, community and hope in all our schools. 9 days ago, I visited the Chiltern Hills Academy, secondary school in Bucks, to meet some sixth formers and the principal. The school's just introduced and enforced a rigorous ban on smartphones below the sixth form, which the sixth form seemed quite happy about, and for the sixth form outside their own study centre, using lockable pouches as referred to by Lord Knight. For the students, genuinely, this seemed to be working well and brought relief. I asked the principal what the effects of the policy were in the first term. His first answer surprised me. It was fewer fights. In fact, no fights. I asked why that should be. Because they cannot be filmed and put online. Overall, the ban translates into better behaviour overall, less bullying, higher levels of concentration, which translate again into more learning, better relationships, healthier communities, higher attainment, all supported now by the extensive research summarised in the briefings that we've received, including the report Disconnect from Policy Exchange. The case for smartphone-free schools seems very strong indeed. A few weeks ago, I had another piece of evidence. I visited a primary school in Oxford and had a sobering conversation with the excellent head teacher. And it concerned the effects of unchecked use of smartphones and social media on those who are now in their 20s and the parents of the children in her school. The head described the challenges of communicating with this TikTok generation of parents. They now have to prepare a very short TikTok-style video of 1 or 2 minutes on such simple subjects as how to prepare a healthy lunchbox, because the concentration levels among the parents have become so low and their ways of receiving information so restricted. They have described as well how much of her staff time is now taken up with responding to parent group WhatsApp messages for similar reasons. All the evidence presented by Jonathan Haidt and others suggests that smartphones need to be regulated through a combination of legislation, industry, good design, intermediate institutions such as workplaces, schools, families and individuals. Addictive technology needs communities of resistance to be formed by schools and by parents. But very senior colleagues agree on the need for those restrictions, but differ somewhat on the means. So I would welcome further government leadership and legislation which set and enforce benchmarks for schools and brings the best research to bear, but which leaves the means of implementation in the hands of the schools and the educators themselves. The mental health and attention span of our children and the whole of our society is at stake.
My Lords, it's a great honour to be making my maiden speech in your Lordship's house. It certainly wasn't a future I could have envisaged when I started my career as a doctor in 1982. In those days, induction was simple. I was handed a bleep and a list of patients and pointed in the general direction of the ward. Although, to allay any panic in the house, I should say that hospital inductions have improved considerably since then. My arrival here was quite different. The induction process organised by the Clerk of the Parliament and his team has been superb, and Blackrod's reassurance that time's on my side and this is a marathon, not a sprint, did much to calm my nerves. The kind welcome from members on all sides of the House has been truly heartwarming, and I'd particularly like to thank my supporters, Baroness Hollins and Baroness Neuberger, who've been an ongoing source of wise counsel, as has my staff contact, James Galbraith. One of my early memories from my houseman years was running for a cardiac arrest just days into a new job. I was well ahead of the pack as I rounded a corner, opened what I took to be the ward door and found myself in a broom cupboard. With the rest of the team hard behind me, I laid low until they'd passed before emerging and arriving last at the scene. Since arriving here, I've spent even more time lost, and I fear that the endlessly kind and patient doorkeepers will be rescuing me from broom cupboards for some time to come. At medical school, adult medicine occupied 95% of my training, so like most young doctors, when I started my first paediatric post, I was terrified. My registrar told me not to worry, children were just like adults, only smaller. Of course, it wasn't true, but it did get me through my first night. And indeed, many years later, when I was moonlighting on an adult ward, I prayed that they were just like children, only bigger. My lords, everyone in this house knows that children are not like adults, only smaller. They're in a dynamic state of physical, personal, and emotional development. So I'm delighted to give my maiden speech as part of this important debate, moved by my noble friend Baroness Kidron, to whom we all owe a debt of gratitude for her tireless work in advocating for children's rights and safety in the online world. Baroness Kidron's already told us about the impacts of smartphones on attention, learning, and culture. Now, some people have questioned the research suggesting that an association between smartphone use and learning problems does not prove causation. However, if we imagine a deliberate social experiment where we expose children to several hours of screen time a day, including potentially harmful content, some negative effects would surely be inevitable. And that, my lords, is what we have done. So with schools already taking positive action to restrict smartphone use, I'd like to make 3 points. Firstly, we need young people's voices in the national debate. 2 recent studies of 13 to 18-year-olds found that 15 to 20% reported addictive-like smartphone use, and this was linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, and insomnia. But the good news is that a majority recognise the problem and were already taking active steps to reduce their smartphone use. Secondly, young people are worried about this issue. It will doubtless be a hot topic among many active youth groups, such as those at National Children's Bureau, Five Rights and the UK Youth Parliament, which is even now running a select committee taking evidence on the links between social media and youth violence. If we don't engage these young advocates to be partners in our deliberations and actions, imposing restrictions in school may just produce behaviours akin to smoking behind the bike shed. Secondly, we know that some young children are at particular risk in the online world, for example, those who are struggling with mental health or have a history of being bullied. Reducing exposure in school may be one strand of a strategy to address this, but more research and action is needed to protect this vulnerable group. And finally, I believe we need to take a public health-style approach to this issue. Parents and teachers need support and information to help them work together rather than pulling in different directions. We need a broad education programme aimed at helping everyone to understand both the risks and benefits of smartphones and how to use them wisely, safely, and in ways which do not compromise learning, mental health and social development.
My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow Baroness Cass and to warmly welcome her here. 5 years ago, the noble lady was anticipating retirement after an immensely distinguished career as a paediatrician specialising in autism and having served, as we've heard, as President of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. She was looking forward to learning the saxophone. Instead, she agreed to chair the Cass Review, taking immense care to study all the evidence, taking nearly 4 years to complete. Informed by meetings with more than 1,000 people, 7 new evidence reviews, and a survey of 15 gender clinics across Europe, she achieved what many thought was impossible, to bring about something close to a consensus on one of the most difficult issues of our time: how best to care for children who are gender questioning or gender distressed. She did so with calm, compassionate and evidence-based writing and reasoning in the publication of the most comprehensive review ever undertaken into youth gender care. This willingness to follow the evidence, not to follow the herd, is what makes her such a welcome addition to our chamber. She is just what we need. And as we come to grapple with issues such as assisted dying, her experience with disability and palliative care in children's medicine will be invaluable. No time for that saxophone, I'm afraid. Baroness Cass, we look forward to your contributions to our debate. It's also a tradition to thank the noble lady for moving today's debate, but I do so with genuine and enthusiastic gratitude. My Lord, childhood has changed beyond imagination, and not for the better. From the change in children's food intake, now an average 80% ultra-processed diet, the teaching of contested ideology in schools as fact, the lack of traditional play to aid development, and worst of all, the addictive nature of smartphones. We should all be focusing on what we can do to protect the next generation from the repercussions of constant, unrestricted access to the internet. Almost daily, new reports indicate that banning smartphones in schools leads to beneficial impacts on educational attainment, social skills, student behaviour and educational inequality. Stopping their use in schools goes a long way to aiding the development of children. It's increasingly clear that smartphones stifle the cognitive skills vital for academic success. A study involving 150,000 students across 16 countries has demonstrated that the proliferation of smartphone usage in the classroom has significantly damaged the process of learning and academic achievement. The recent policy exchange report mentioned by other noble lords found that children in schools that have an effective ban on smartphones achieve GCSE results 1 to 2 grades higher than those that do not. It also found that only around 11% of secondary schools have an effective smartphone ban, although those numbers are rapidly increasing as more and more schools recognise the dangers and the harms. It found direct correlations to other positive outcomes, including noticeable reductions in bullying and an increase in amounts of healthy physical activity by pupils. A legal ban on smartphones for school across the UK would provide protection for teachers when parents push back, although most parents I speak to are worried sick about the impact constant access to phones is having on their children and would welcome such a ban. The unions are increasingly concerned too. In response to the NASUWT Big Question Survey, asking what pupil behaviour problems cause the most concern on a day-to-day basis, the percentage of teachers who think distraction of mobile phones is a major issue has risen from 20% just 4 years ago to 32% today. They comment, social media has encouraged poor behaviours and has been the catalyst for poor behaviour in general. Social media is affecting how students form relationships. Students use phone and social media almost constantly. They are unaware of the world, each other, anything. That, my lords, from one of our leading teaching unions. Now, as a mother of two, thankfully born and raised in a world before smartphones, I do, of course, recognise the value which they can bring to a child's security, but while they are in school, they are secure. Relentless consumption of internet content provides not only a threat to learning, but to mental health. Jonathan Haidt, author of The Anxious Generation, an expert social psychologist, cites social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction as the symptoms of smartphone overusage by young people. Only last week, health professionals were here in Parliament giving powerful evidence about the damage caused to developmental issues, including language and communication, as well as physical changes to the brain, eyesight, leading to eating disorders, obesity, musculoskeletal changes, as well as sleep. It's worth looking at the evidence of children themselves. After the John Wallis Academy imposed a complete ban on smartphones, a set of Year 7 pupils were asked as part of the survey how they felt about the ban. Only 11% wished they had more access to their devices, while 52% of pupils felt the policy had an extremely positive impact, citing more human interactions, better concentration and increased learning. The evidence is clear. Without regulation, our children face a dystopian future, and I urge the Ministerial and her other colleagues to act without delay.
Hear, hear. My Lords, I'd like to congratulate and welcome Baroness Cass to the House. I'm looking forward to discussing these matters and others with her. Further, to thank my friend Baroness Kidron for calling for this debate this afternoon. It is absolutely vital we discuss this amongst other things. Thank you. I also would like to thank those of the House of Lords Library and many organisations outside and individuals who sent me many links and much advice. Too much to be able to mention this afternoon. I'm pleased to address the crucial issue of mandating mobile phone-free schools. As Baroness Kidron's question rightly highlights, there is a growing interest in restricting mobile phone use within educational settings. While, my lords, the measure holds great promise for fostering positive learning environments, we must also recognise the disproportionate impact that mobile phones have, and especially social media, have on adolescents' mental health and particularly young girls. My lords, research from the UK Millennium Cohort Study, alongside similar international findings, reveals a clear gender disparity on how social media influences mental health. Girls, on average, spend more time on social media than boys, which concentrates with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and body, my lords, disfiguration. Young women face particularly vulnerability in the pressures of idealistic online contents that risks online harassment as well. For those who engage with social media for 5 or more hours each day, depressive symptoms can increase as much as 50%. The stark statistics highlight the emotional and emotional toil experienced by many young women. Furthermore, my lords, bullying increasingly occurs online, with mobile phones ending harmful behaviours. That is what may lead to severe disciplinary actions, such as suspensions or expulsions in extreme cases, which none of us wish to have from schools. Mobile phones become a weapon of choice in bullying, especially in mental health and well-being facing our students. My lords, the frequent use of smartphones is linked to negative effects on both physical and mental health. Prolonged screen time has been shown to impair impulse control, encourage addictive behaviours, and hinder concentration. My lords, social media use is also associated with lower self-esteem and heightened levels of depression, as I've mentioned earlier, and anxiety. Additionally, the blue light inhibited by smartphones can damage eyesight, disrupt sleep, and contribute to other health issues. Clearly, time away from smartphones would be beneficial for students' overall well-being. My lords, a mobile phone-free policy in schools could mitigate these risks, but we must also consider its potential to deepen inequalities, particularly for children from less stable family backgrounds. We must acknowledge the need for students with caring responsibilities or those split families. For some, reachable by phone is essential. For instance, those who care for siblings or other family members may need to respond, my lords, quickly in an emergency. Similarly, children who have to move between homes due to shared custody arrangements rely on phones to stay connected with both parents. A blanket mobile phone ban, my lords, would inadvertently place additional stress on these students who depend on these devices for emotional support and stability. In light of these challenges, my lords, I advocate for a balanced nuisance approach to mobile phone use in schools. We should consider structured policies that limit distractions while recognizing the legitimate need for occasional communications. My lords, for instance, media use should be prohibited during school hours, although I acknowledge that enforcing this would be difficult. I realise my time's up. Thank you.
My lords, I also congratulate my noble friend Baroness Kidron for her insight and her expertise and her sort of unflagging focus on this issue. Mm-hmm. And I also welcome Baroness Cass to our benches. My lords, the move towards mobile phone-free schools is gathering momentum around the world, interestingly, particularly in Asia. And the guidance from the DFE this February is very welcome. I decided to try and use a real school as an example. So I spent some time yesterday with David Smith, the headmaster of Fulham Boys' School, for his insights into the mobile phone policies for his 800 pupils. 97% of the seniors have a smartphone. 56% of 10 to 11-year-olds have a smartphone. 42% of his boys reported receiving about 50 notifications a day. 11% reported receiving over 200. 38% of the boys reported that they are allowed unrestricted access to their smartphone at home by their parents. The boys are happy with the new policy, unlike some of the parents of the older boys. And the parents of the younger boys are ecstatic with the new policy. The parents who are concerned either feel that their children should have unrestricted access or are anxious to be able to be in almost constant contact with their children. It is interesting that the parents are far more anxious than their own children. David commented that a smartphone-free school is not the answer, since it will be continuously damaging for children if they're able to continue to use smartphones outside the school. And to illustrate that, many of the younger boys, the 10 or 11-year-olds who arrive there, have been exposed online already to pornography, violence, and misogyny. And he said it is a shame that we have to teach these boys about these elements in society after they have learned about them, rather than before. And he and other headmasters are working with smartphone manufacturers to encourage them to develop a scaled-down smartphone which can access some services, such as transport and mapping apps, but not others. So I have 3 specific requests of the government, of the DFE. I don't necessarily expect an answer at the dispatch box, so if the noble lady, the Minister, and the DFE would follow up in writing, that would be fine. First of all, could I urge the government to work with schools and the mobile phone industry to develop safe intermediate phones, for example, that could be used by child carers, by those who have diabetes and other things, but which are not allowed, will not allow them to access the darker reaches of the online world. Secondly, the DFE, please, needs to work very, very closely with Ofsted. I'm very conscious that when we were doing the online safety bill, we were pouring more and more responsibility onto Ofcom. I suspect in this world we will be putting more and more responsibility onto Ofsted, and we need to make sure they understand what it is they are looking for and measuring. Thirdly, robust, reliable and understandable data is absolutely key. And I was looking at a major Australian scoping review this year by the Journal of Psychologists and Counsellors in Schools, who only managed to find 22 different studies in the entire world which actually met the threshold of rigour that was required. And I was going to quote from the report, but I won't. But essentially what it says is there is a severe lack of really reliable evidence and data on which to judge what should be done and the effectiveness of what's being done. So please can the government prioritise working with appropriate institutions and other governments to develop high-quality, robust evidence and interpretation of outcomes. We know why we're doing this, but we don't know enough about what really works.
My Lords, I thank the noble Baroness Lady Kidron for securing this debate and congratulate the noble Baroness Lady Cass on her maiden speech. I still remember the excitement from the day I purchased my first mobile at the age of 10 from the Argos catalogue. Roll on just over 20 years and mobiles have very much changed. One of the biggest differences is the access to apps and sites that seek to elongate the time children spend on their devices in order to expose them to advertising content. Whilst restricting phones in schools seems a sensible start, I have concerns that it would simply be a temporary sticking plaster, masking the much wider problems of how younger generations interact with tech and the addictive nature of the content fed to them via algorithms designed with the specific intent of keeping them online. While smartphones can do wonderful things like teach children new languages, help their parents or guardians track their location, they also have the potential to cause isolation, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Bullying no longer stops at the school gate. It continues on when children are at home. Internet Matters found that 71% of children had experienced harm online. The Ofcom Children and Parents Media Use and Attitudes Report in 2023 found that among 3 to 17-year-olds, 53% were on TikTok, 46% on Snapchat, and 88% of them use YouTube. This has undoubtedly had a huge impact on the views and aspirations of our younger generations. A poll by Lego of children aged 8 to 12 found British and American children were nearly 3 times more likely to want to be YouTube influencers compared to astronauts when they grew up. The influence of social media doesn't stop at career aspiration, with the British Association of Dermatologists recently warning of irreversible skin problems due to the growing trend of children as young as 8 using anti-aging skincare products they had seen on TikTok and YouTube. Vodafone found that algorithms are pushing content to boys related to misogyny and violence following innocent and unrelated searches. If we do not break from the status quo, we will have a generation of children whose thoughts and opinions have been shaped by algorithms designed to maximize engagement in order to hold their attention for ever-increasing periods of time, in order to sell advertising revenue, with the content of pushing more and more extreme content to them. One article I read suggested 99% of Snapchat's revenue is from advertising. In South Korea recently, we saw the distressing report of an outbreak of sexually explicit deepfake content with forums dedicated to specific schools. Here in the UK, Internet Matters has found that 13% of children have experience with a new deepfake. My private member's bill would create further offences around the non-consensual creation of sexually explicit content. However, the problem is not just deepfake. One woman I spoke to recalled how she was 11 years old when she first received a sexually explicit image on Snapchat. Furthermore, we have recently seen hugely distressing cases of children taking their own lives due to so-called sextortion, where they are blackmailed with intimate images. Whilst it is always illegal for children to share or create intimate images, we must face up to the reality that this is happening and remove the shame and stigma so no child feels like they have no other option but to take their own life. My lords, we must remember there is a very simple choice here. Tech companies can provide phones and apps that are safe by design. It is becoming increasingly clear that they are choosing not to.
Speaking after Baroness Kidron on this subject is rather like Ruth gleaning after a combine harvester. I agree with absolutely everything she said in her masterful summary of the subject. The statistic which haunts me at night is a statistic about people who've just left our schools. It's from the National Statistics Office, and we're told that this year there are 872,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 24, not in work, not in employment or training. And we're also told that a large part of that has to do with technologies and the sort of dangers and pressures which other noble lords have been describing. To quote Jonathan Haidt again, but a different phrase, Gen Z became the first generation in history to go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that called them away from the people nearby and into an alternative universe that was exciting, addictive, and unstable. And this has had devastating effects. But perhaps, as the noble Lord Knight suggested, it's a wake-up time for public authorities, for parents, to regain our courage after a period in which there's been a great deal of hesitancy about positively teaching and reinforcing healthful ways of life as established truths rather than merely interesting topics for classroom discussion. There is a crisis of authority involved in what we've been discussing, and that's left the field to some extent empty, to be filled with people with repellent views like Andrew Tate. I was very impressed by the maiden speech of the noble lady Baroness Cass, and particularly her appeal that the voices of young people should be represented in this debate. We cannot disinvent the social media. We must learn how to live with it fruitfully. And I've been particularly inspired, in the spirit of what she said, by a campaign launched by a 17-year-old from Glasgow, Lewis Swire, a remarkable young man who's already won the Diana Award in 2023 for social activism. He's launched Reel It In. It's a youth-led campaign to end social media addiction. And he actually cites the 2019 special report of the Science and Technology Committee of Another Place, which said, quotes, strategies to prolong user engagement should be prohibited. And I'd like to ask the Minister how far the government has got with devising ways of doing precisely that. We're exposing people to some very dangerous material. My last word is the inquest on the death of Molly Russell, aged 14, from Harrow, concluded that she ended her life while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online contact.
My Lords, I would like to thank the Noble Baroness Lady Kidron for securing this debate, which I do believe is incredibly important for the future well-being and success of our younger generations, and congratulate the Noble Baroness Lady Cass on her maiden speech. If I could please start with some alarming statistics. 1 out of every 2 teenagers feel addicted to their smartphones. 60% of parents feel their children are addicted to them. 77% of parents feel their child gets distracted by his or her devices and they do not pay attention when they're together at least a few times per week. In a recent school assembly on smartphones and social media, 240 Year 7 students were asked, who has a smartphone? Almost every hand went up. They were then asked, who here last night was awoken by a notification on their smartphone? Sadly, half raised their hands. Around 1 in 5 adolescents in England have been cyberbullied. When we check our smartphones, our brains release a small amount of dopamine, and that dopamine motivates us to take action, and each time we hear a notification, we check our device. The huge issue is that the dopamine boost is temporary and leads to a letdown. Our brains want more dopamine, which triggers the habit of checking our phones constantly throughout the day. We should be listening to Josh McAllister, a former teacher who now resides in the other place, and he is clear there is a growing body of evidence showing that smartphones and social media in particular are negatively impacting children's mental health, sleep and learning. My Lords, it was confirmed only a few hours ago that Australia will ban children under 16 years old from using social media after its Senate approved the world's strictest laws. Some Los Angeles schools are banning smartphones as the leaders of the schools believe it will unlock creativity and connection. I know firsthand from 2 large independent schools in the UK, both who now have a policy of banning smartphones for certain year groups at certain parts of the day. It works. The results show that the students talk to each other, they interact socially, they want to do more drama, they want to do more art and more sport. I am not suggesting there are no benefits to children having smartphones. The world has changed dramatically in the past 20 years, and social norms have changed with it. But why would you allow a child to have an addictive device in a classroom when that child should be learning and building on the foundations of knowledge which will empower them for the rest of their lives? I have a simple question for the Noble Lady the Minister, which is, given all the evidence available, why would the government not want to ban smartphones in the classroom?
My Lords, it was a joy to listen to the Noble Lady Baroness Cass's excellent maiden speech, and we look forward to her future contributions. And in thanking the noble Lady Baroness Kidron for securing this debate this afternoon, I'm not going to go through the usual pleasantries. Simply put, I cannot think of anyone else in this country who has done more to influence policy and legislation to protect children from the ravages of the internet than the noble lady. We all owe her a great debt of thanks. She never gives up. I first bought a mobile phone in 1985. I would guess a few years before the noble lady, Baroness Owen, bought hers. Those days, you had to have the strength of Hercules to be able to lift it to your ear. That was 40 years ago. It means that for nearly half my life, I have possessed a mobile phone. Like many of us, it's an essential part of my being. I don't know how I could live without it. But today, I think we have the terminology wrong. The word phone is a misnomer. This debate has the word phone in its title. But when was the last time you saw a child using a mobile as a phone? They don't talk. They text, they FaceTime, and they use social media. The mobile today is a very powerful communications tool that just happens to have a phone and a camera attached. It is a window to the world that provides access to the most of human knowledge and activity, for better and for worse. And my lords, this story is nowhere near over. Shortly, new iPhones will have powerful AI built into them, Apple Intelligence, and Google will be following just behind. Where's that going? I have no idea. I sense much of it is not good. Today, Meta and Apple sell virtual reality goggles. They are expensive and cumbersome, but they point to the direction of travel. Devices which will look like normal reading glasses, but which have the same capability of mobile phones, are just around the corner. All of these developments will pose challenges to the school environment. How will they be detected and controlled? The noble lady is a joint author of an outstanding report produced by the LSE. This report states that more evidence is needed, whether or not to have mobile phones in schools. My instinct is not. I believe that children or teenagers should not be permitted to use their devices on school premises. Why? First of all, the smart devices have value, several £100 each. London is the world centre of iPhone theft. It's all too tempting and dangerous. Then there is device envy. Most children can spot the up-to-date phone immediately. Is it healthy to have children putting pressure on parents for the latest model? Then, of course, there is content. Can this be controlled by schools and parents? In theory, yes, but we all know it's easy to circumvent. Do we really want children looking at unsuitable content at school? My lords, many schools are subjected to intense personal pressure to allow mobiles to be used on their premises. It's often hard for a school to resist. Making it mandatory would resolve this problem.
Lords, I too would like to thank the noble Lady Baroness Kidron for securing the debate and congratulate Lady Cass on her wonderful maiden speech, as inspirational as her work as Dr. Cass. I've learnt a lot from being part of our Learn with the Lords education outreach programme. And for noble lords not familiar with it, the format is we visit the school in question, make a PowerPoint presentation, and then have an extended question and answer session, followed by lunch with the head and all senior staff. I always take the opportunity to turn the question and answer session around and two particular topical subjects with both students and teachers are smartphones in schools and the voting age. These students are usually in the years 10 to 13 range, so mid-teens. My lords, my findings are derived, therefore, from the strawest of straw polls, based on random visits to half a dozen schools in Hampshire. Nevertheless, the feedback from the students and teachers left a strong impression of a wider consensus. About the use of smartphones in schools, there are two aspects: smartphones on the school premises as a whole, and smartphones in classrooms. I would say the overwhelming opinion of teachers is that they should be banned from the school premises in total, and from pupils they could see the point of them being banned in classrooms, but were against them being banned in, for instance, playgrounds and common areas. The arguments for having smartphones banned throughout the school are that teachers observe students becoming addicted to social media and arcade games in particular, and for teachers an unprovable suspicion that their pupils' young minds are being manipulated by cynically written software to increase their addiction. Teachers also noticed an increase in sleep deprivation, with many students falling asleep during class time or playtime, and the assumption that this is caused by them having screen time rather than sleep time at night. An equal objection is the lack of social interaction with children and teenagers no longer learning directly from each other, but remotely from whomever or whatever is on the other end of their smartphones. All this has been made much worse by the terrible decision to close schools during the lockdowns, and during that time, their only same-age company was via a smartphone at home. I visited one special education needs school which had a variation on this theme, which was that students felt the need to be able to contact their parents at any time, and the not being able to do so could easily cause anxiety and distress. The solution here is obvious: to have a phone that just makes phone calls and sends texts. In other words, phones but not smartphones. And this, in fact, could be a wider solution to the problem at hand. Lastly, my lords, 2 weeks ago, I gave a guided tour of your lordship's house to a teacher and half a dozen overseas teenagers from the Philippines, the Congo, Morocco, China, Ukraine, and Argentina. Later, we repaired for tea in the River Restaurant. In light of the debate today, I asked them about smartphones in schools. It seems this is a worldwide discussion. The consensus was clear. A ban was the only way for students to be able to give their full attention to their teachers and each other. My lords, all this is anecdotal evidence, I know, but evidence nevertheless, in support of a ban on smartphones, but not necessarily on ordinary text and call phones.
I too would like to congratulate Baroness Kidron, not just on this debate, but for her tireless advocacy for online safety for all children. She has my lasting gratitude, especially as a current parent of a teenager. My interest as a recent chair of governors is also in the register. I fear, my lords, we will look back on this particular cohort of children who have grown up with all the challenges of the social media age and ask ourselves what on earth we were thinking. I would also like to congratulate Baroness Cass on her thoughtful maiden speech, and I look forward to hearing more in the future. As any parent of a child in this digital age will be aware, parents feel as if they are constantly judged and endlessly failing when this issue is discussed. So the care and kindness in this debate has been extremely welcome. If you've ever been involved in a losing battle whilst food is ready and on the table for the end of FIFA, Minecraft, Roblox, and my personal nemesis, Fortnite, you will understand it isn't easy. But our role here is to help and support and reinforce parents and teachers alike in their efforts to grow a future generation filled with joy and confidence. As all the speakers have made clear today, we are in serious peril right now of doing the exact opposite. Only today we have the news from Ofcom that nearly a quarter of teenagers are lying about their age to access social media apps, which is a sharp reminder, my lords, of just how important the Online Safety Act is and how much tech firms need to do to protect children from harmful content. A sharp reminder too of the urgency needed to fix the solution to the much vexed issue of age assurance. If, as the ONS states, 1 in 5 children have experienced online bullying, with nearly 3 in 4 having experienced it on a school premises, then I think the evidence, my lords, and from this debate, is becoming clear, that we need to act now, and that the direction of travel is pretty clear. I would be interested to hear from the Minister what liaison there has been with the Australian government regarding the decision by the Senate today to ban children from social media sites under the age of 16. The temptation throughout this debate, of course, is to go much broader than the issue of safety of children online. But the question is about the period when they are within the care of our educators within the schools. In principle, as set out by my noble friend Baroness Thornhill and by the many teachers that we have within our benches, we believe very ferociously in the right of the head teacher and senior leaders in schools to call the shots. And also we are fearful of further regulatory burdens on them. At the same time, the lack of clarity for parents and teachers alike has led to the conclusion that more restriction is necessary, so we must now establish how to make it workable. There are areas where we need to maintain discretion and safeguards led by head teachers and senior leaders in schools, firstly for young carers who need to stay in touch with their families. And I thank the Carers Trust for their briefing. They make clear that only, and in their words, only 58% of schools and colleges in a survey said that young carers had access to a phone if needed. They go on to say it is important that all young carers have access to a phone if they need to check on the person they care for or to be contacted in relation to their caring role. Schools should ensure that sensitive phone calls can be made in a quiet, private space rather in the school office or toilet cubicles. And some of the descriptions in their report are heartbreaking, of young carers having to make calls from the toilets to check on how the people that they look after are. As my lords will be aware, we in the Liberal Democrats highlighted the importance of care, both social care and carers, in the general election. Indeed, ours was the only manifesto to have a separate chapter on the issue. Ed Davey himself was a young carer and fully understands the significance of that role. Secondly, as other peers have referenced, the necessary discretion for school leaders when it comes to children who need a phone for medical reasons. In all the evidence we have been sent in preparation for this debate, I searched, like Baroness Goody, for some information about the inequality issue, and I would be very grateful if the Minister could elaborate on that, because whilst it's notable that in some nations elsewhere in the world that are moving towards greater restrictions or have had them in place for some time, like France, for instance, where it's enshrined in law up to the age of 15 on school premises, I was interested in the library briefing about the recent lift of the ban in New York, and the reason for that, which was about the ban tended to be enforced only in low-income communities. And so, again, I would be interested, if restrictions are introduced, what are the measures that are going to be taken, or what exploration, because it's vital to ensure there's no impact on those who suffer already from digital inequality. If, as legislators, we are to take the step of some form of ban, or as Baroness Kidron rightly points out, restriction, we need to understand that confusion that already exists, particularly from the perspective of the school pupil. As the Five Rights research makes clear, pupils are regularly pushed towards various edtech products to check their phones with homework apps such as MyEd, Satchel, Mathletics, and so many more. Students are positively encouraged in some schools to use their phones to take a picture of what is on the whiteboard. What is the way that is going to be handled? As we've heard, the phone is a tiny item. It's burning a hole in the blazer pocket. With updates on social media sites such as Snapchat and TikTok, it can connect to so many great things such as love, friendship, or in my son's case, sport. But any parent who has insisted on their child going to school, a secondary school, with a brick phone, Yeah, I definitely tried this one. And without a smartphone, in turn ensures that their child is absent from the relevant WhatsApp groups, and what we need here is a level playing field. Restrictions at school, obviously, would fix this. At the same time, smartphones in schools can be the source of huge pain from bullying, addiction, and in some cases, and too many, I believe, that are uncovered, blackmail. With the recent horrific case in Northern Ireland of Alexander McCartney still prominent in our minds, with over 3,000 children who he catfished, and with the hundreds he blackmailed into sending intimate images, we need to understand that any victim of a crime of that nature on a school premises has to have a social worker assigned. I would ask the Minister to look in particular at this specific issue and see if the Department for Education can find a way to understand just how prolific this is right now. Teaching staff tell me it is. But of course, what teenager is brave enough to talk within a school when they are a victim of crime within a school? Many of Alexander McCartney's victims were unable to speak up at all until it was tragically too late. Can I ask the Minister if, as the government currently intends to continue with the approach of the previous government, we are to continue with guidance only and not regulation, what are the provisions that can be put in place for children to report when they are victims of crime? And, my lords, I suspect that it is far greater than we currently have sight of in this way. Whilst on the school premises, how will this be monitored so that we know the extent of the problem, and how within schools it can be handled with sensitivity and care so that victims feel able to speak up? I think, my lords, from this debate we've had today, we are headed towards one particular direction, and that is some form of regulation beyond guidance. So the question is, what form will it take? I look forward to the Minister clarifying when and how.
Here.
An excellent debate, and I'd like to join the queue of noble lords in thanking Baroness Kidron, not just for securing the debate today, but for all her work in this area, and also to thank the noble Baroness Lady Cass for her speech, and particularly for her courage and her integrity in leading her review. I also wanted to thank all the organisations who shared their expertise and insight ahead of this debate, particularly those representing parents, including Parentkind and Smartphone-Free Childhood, as well as the work of the Children's Commissioner in making sure that the voice of children is never absent. But I'd like to start where Baroness Kidron started, when she said this should be straightforward. I couldn't agree more with the noble lady, and it's sort of frustrating that it isn't more straightforward. And listening to the debate this afternoon, what came through very strongly was an overwhelming sense that phones are part of a much wider problem with social media and the enforcement of restrictions on its use for children, but also the addictive nature of social media apps, as we heard explained both by the noble lady Baroness Kidron and by my noble friend Baroness Owen. And with a very few exceptions, I think what we heard is that phones have no place in school, with medical conditions being an obvious exception that requires particular care. But we also heard that we don't really understand their impact, and that was even without AI. And the noble Lord Mitchell rightly raised the issue that what phones will look like in a matter of months with the inclusion of powerful AI obviously takes us to another level of lack of understanding. And I think that points us to a position where we should default to a safety-first approach in relation to children. But even if we don't fully understand their impact, all of the early indications are pointing in the same direction. We heard this afternoon the significant impact on mental health, sometimes with the most tragic consequences imaginable, but in a more universal sense, the ability for children to concentrate. And we heard, and many of us read, that this is not just about the child who is using a phone in class, but it's also the impact on other pupils in class, and it's even the impact when the phone is turned off but sitting on their desk. And I hadn't thought about this ahead of the debate, but my noble friend Earl Effingham is absolutely right that that's not just a daytime problem, it's even a nighttime problem with children being interrupted with notifications. We know that increased cognitive load and increased distraction impacts on attainment, and we understand that that is greatest for low attaining and low income children, exactly the children who we need to encourage and support and take barriers away from their achievement and learning. I also talked to a couple of head teachers ahead of the debate and got two very contrasting reflections. One actually was exactly the same as the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Oxford, which was the immediate alleviation of bullying when phones were removed from a school, but not just within the school, but the ability to use the phone to spread that bullying online by filming it. And of course, the noble lady Baroness Grender was right to mention the rising issue of fraud and how phones are used to defraud children. But actually, on a happier note, I also heard from a head teacher who felt that they had been able actually to expand their curriculum, because by banning phones in schools, it freed up so much time that they could actually pack more into the school day. So maybe that will be something for the government to consider. Phones also cut across the lines of communication between schools and parents, encouraging children to communicate directly with their parents rather than through the school. And like my noble friend Baroness Jenkin, I also benefited from the excellent presentation from the group Health Professionals for Safer Screens, who set out their concerns about the impact of screens. And although some argue for educational benefits, and we heard tentative pointers in that direction in this debate, I think we can ask, why can't a desktop or a laptop perform the same educational function? I was very drawn to Lord Hampton's A5 diary. And of course, we should also consider the use of AI on phones for plagiarism and the impact of that on the integrity of schoolwork. So we find ourselves in a situation where, according to the excellent report prepared by Policy Exchange earlier this year, only 11% of schools have truly effective policies to ban phones. And certainly when I visited schools each week, pupils would tell me how relieved they were about putting their phones in a locker or in one of the pouches that the noble Lord Knight referred to. Teachers would tell me how much difference it made to behaviour and concentration, and I hadn't even thought of Lord Hampton's point about a cashless and phoneless child being less vulnerable to being mugged, but that's obviously incredibly important. I would also suggest that the impact of the removal of phones also can help improve attendance because of the calmness in the classroom, and perhaps this is overly optimistic, but with better behaviour, I think we could all hope that it would improve teacher retention, something which is so important. I note that the Children's Commissioner is undertaking a survey of every school in the country, and I'd like to thank her for her work in this area, including in relation to the draft Children's Online Code. And in her survey, she goes into detail about a school's mobile phone policy, and I think this will be a source of extremely useful insight for the government. She also, in that survey, which schools are legally required to complete, asks about safeguarding incidents and where these occurred, including specifically asking whether they occurred online, which again I think will be very helpful. So in closing, I'd just like to ask the Noble Baroness, the Minister, the following questions, and if she doesn't have the answers today, maybe she would be good enough to write. I just wondered what assessment the department has made of the impact of the guidance that was produced for schools earlier this year, and does she think that there are areas that need tightening up? I reread it and obviously take my collective responsibility in what's within it, but there is an option D in the guidance which feels to me on reflection quite optimistic, which is the never seen, never heard policy. And I just, i.e. that, you know, children have their phones but they don't turn them on and they don't look at them. I'm not sure where those children are, but I wondered whether the Noble Lady knew how this works in practice. I wondered also whether the DFE is working with researchers in the field so that they can make sure that schools and trusts have the highest quality information possible, and how the department plans to use the evidence from the Children's Commissioner's survey, which will be complete by the end of the year. And then just finally, given the mounting and evidence of the risks that mobile phones pose combined with wider social media risks, I wondered whether the Noble Lady could explain why the government is not supporting Josh McAllister's private members' bill, and also whether the government has plans for any kind of public health campaign directed at parents to make sure they're aware of the risks of phones. My Lords, the importance of a healthy childhood was captured very simply many years ago in the words of Aristotle, who said, and I quote, "The habits we form from childhood make no small difference, but rather they make all the difference." With that in mind, I look forward to the Minister's remarks.
My Lords, may I start by thanking the Noble Lady Baroness Kidron for opening this debate on the increasing interest in mobile phones-free schools and the move towards mobile-free school environments in recent months and years. Before I move on, I just would like to say to your Noble Lords, my Lords, the irony of getting updates from your box on WhatsApp during this debate has not been lost to me throughout. I am grateful for the many excellent contributions today from members across your Lordship's House, but specifically and especially I want to congratulate Baroness Cass on an excellent maiden speech, and I welcome her to our House and look forward to hearing from her in the months and years ahead. Both Baroness Cass and Lord Chartres emphasised the role of young people's voices in this, and that the fact that they are not heard. At that point, I need to put on record my wonderful stepdaughter, who is 13 going on 30, and has very clear views on this. Her voice is what will drive me today, and her determination that I cannot say that TikTok should be banned, so I won't. But both the Noble Lord and the Noble Baroness highlighted voices, and I'd like to offer Baroness Cass, if she'll work with me to facilitate DFE officials meeting with young advocates so that we can make sure that their voices are heard at the centre of policy. My Lords, this debate has been an education, and in the preparation for this debate, what became clear to me, just touched on by Noble Lords, is that the majority of academic evidence that has been done was done actually prior to COVID, and the bulk of evidence is 2019 or before. Very little of it has been updated. In this world, 2019 might as well have been 1979. We need to look at the data and move forward. COVID has changed everything, but so has the use of technology in schools since that point, so we do need to consider. Before I move on to the substance of the debate, I also want to thank Lord Strathcarron for highlighting Learn with Lords. It's one of the things I miss most from sitting on the ministerial benches now, and it is a joy to participate in. I would urge all noble members to engage. In terms of the debate, I want to begin by setting out the firm belief of this government that every child and young person should know that success can belong to them. This comes from all children achieving and thriving, able to benefit from the opportunities provided by education. There is a fierce debate happening globally about the impact of mobile phones, or smart devices, as my noble friend Lord Mitchell so passionately highlighted, and their impact on social media on children's well-being and development. Teachers and school leaders tell us about the negative impact that mobile phones can have on children's learning, leading to bullying, distraction and disruption, as the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Oxford, so clearly outlined. Indeed, in 2023, almost a third of secondary school pupils reported that in most of their lessons, pupils use a mobile phone when they are not supposed to. Every pupil deserves to learn in a safe, calm classroom, and we will always support our hard-working and dedicated teachers to make this happen. To reassure noble lords, as Baroness Thornhill emphasised, the government's mobile phones in schools guidance is clear that schools should prohibit the use of mobile phones throughout the school day, including lessons, the time between lessons, break times and lunch times. In terms of this guidance, as with all guidance, responding to the noble Baroness Baron, this will always be under review and updated, so we will report back if there were going to be any further changes. In terms of questions that came on this area from Baroness Kidron, Baroness Jenkin and the Earl of Effingham, on existing government guidance on mobile phones and making it statutory, the guidance already sets clear expectations. The government believes this is sufficient at this time, a position supported by unions, whose view is that schools already have the ability and accountability to put the guidance into practice. We will continue to monitor this. My Lords, we know that by the age of 12, 97% of children in Britain have their own mobile phone, and almost all children are using these devices to watch videos and use social media. This can lead them to seeing content that they themselves have described as harmful or worrying. Around 1/3 of children aged from 8 to 17 years old have seen something they would describe this way, with a lot of these children also being exposed to hurtful content via cyberbullying and algorithms, as many noble lords have highlighted. When it comes to their parents, almost half feel that the risks of social media outweigh the benefits. I regularly feel that way. Something that we must all consider when making decisions on the use of technology, particularly because the most common reason for 62% of children aged between 8 and 17 having multiple accounts for the same social network is to prevent family from seeing some content. That 62% of our children have multiple accounts online. Now, some of those reasons for having them may be valid, but some may not. Meanwhile, when it comes to what is happening in schools, last year around 1/3 of pupils reported that most of their lessons were disrupted in some way by a mobile phone. This prevents teachers from teaching and prevents pupils from benefiting from the opportunities that school provides them. Not only that, but there is some evidence that this has a greater impact on the most disadvantaged pupils, with those eligible for free school meals, for instance, 6% more likely to have their learning disrupted. With regards to some of the issues that were raised with relation to mobile phones in schools, specifically Baroness Kidron on media literacy in early years, or rather the lack of it, The Government has established an independent curriculum and assessment review. The review will seek to deliver an excellent foundation in core subjects of reading, writing and maths. This also includes the key digital skills needed for future life and the critical thinking skills needed to ensure children are resilient to misinformation and extremist content online. We'll look to see how that applies to early years, and I will write to the Noble Lady with an update. In terms of current reasons for this policy, this government does not believe it is necessary to legislate to ban phones entirely from schools. We know that schools are already prohibiting their use, including through outright bans. We know that even before guidance was published, around 97% of all schools in England had policies restricting mobile phone use in some way. The guidance tightened this up, setting a higher expectation for restricting use through the day and across school sites. There are a range of ways in which mobile-free environment can be achieved. We trust head teachers to develop a mobile phone policy. After all, they are the people who know their schools, their pupils and their communities best. As Lord Hampton outlined, and I thank him for his excellent speech, each school operates in different communities, has different needs, and it has different needs, especially outside the school. As my noble friend Lord Knight described, some schools ban devices from their site, providing a simple boundary which is easy to enforce. Some schools have established bag-free days where all personal possessions, including mobile phones, are kept in lockers or similar storage. Others choose to collect mobile phones from pupils on arrival and return them at the end of the day, which can be useful for safety when pupils have longer travel times or when it is dark walking home. We encourage all schools to consult with parents and pupils to make sure they can effectively mitigate concerns and so that all members of the school community share clear expectations. With regard to some of the specifics that follow from this, I think it was Lord Russell who asked about the role of Ofsted on this issue. The DfE is already taking steps towards delivering better accountability system, which will see school report cards introduced from September 25. A new inspection framework will have greater focus on pupil outcomes to drive higher standards, alongside a range of measures to reduce anxiety for students and staff being inspected. Consultation on this process will begin in early 2025. In terms of the impact on disadvantaged children, including those with SEND, which was touched on by some noble lords, the mobile phone in schools guidance contains practical advice for schools, including case studies, which consider how to ensure that the needs of all children are being met while continuing to remove distractions in lessons. This includes making clear that even while restricting mobile phone use, schools must comply with their wider legal duties. This includes making reasonable adjustments when necessary for disabled pupils, where schools must take reasonable steps to avoid disadvantage to a disabled pupil caused by the school's policies or practices on mobile phones. Schools have a duty to have arrangements in place to support those pupils with medical conditions, as was touched on. For instance, where children with diabetes can monitor their blood glucose levels from their own mobile phone, or where those with hearing loss can manage their hearing aids via an app. There may be other exceptional circumstances where schools should consider making adaptations to their policy for specific pupils because of the needs or circumstances, including at home. My Lords, we want to make clear that the government's view on mobile phones in schools should not be construed as anti-technology. As Lord Knight made clear, technology is a huge part of modern society. So the emphasis needs to be on using it safely to make sure that all pupils continue to access the positive opportunity that tech can afford them. We understand that for many children, online spaces can be important for developing a sense of self and can provide an opportunity to express oneself and to learn outside of the classroom. Alongside that, when used appropriately, the internet and social media can be places where many young people can engage in political discourse, I would have, and develop wider knowledge of current affairs. If we restrict access to these spaces, we risk young people losing a key opportunity to grow as people and be better informed about the world around them. The government is taking the initiative and ensuring that social media companies take responsibility for the safety of young users. Parents should be able to feel confident that the digital world can be a space where the negatives eventually no longer outweigh the benefits. As Baroness Owen emphasised, with the use of mobile phones already prohibited in school, it is outside of school that children are using these devices and spending time online, particularly where use is excessive, displacing other positive activities. There are risks involved. Last year, UNESCO linked increased screen time to adverse effects on young people's mental and physical health, with worldwide studies showing that increased screen time, which is typically both largest and most impactful on school-age children, can negatively affect diet, sleep, eye health and mental health. However, this remains a complex issue, and overall the evidence remains mixed. We cannot say that mobile phones are universally bad. For some young people, particularly some of the most vulnerable who may be struggling with a feeling of belonging, finding an identity and a community online can be hugely beneficial for their mental health, where mobile phones can help to build and maintain relationships that provide a real lifeline. For other young people, online contact can help them to discover their passions, support educational engagement or enrichment, and in turn promote lifelong interests or career prospects. To realise these benefits, what is vitally important is that all children and young people can use mobile phones safely. Everyone, including parents, schools and providers, is responsible for making sure that children are aware of the importance of internet safety. That is why the updated Teaching Online Safety in Schools guidance helps schools deliver a coordinated and coherent curriculum on all aspects of internet safety, not just those related to relationships, sex and health, tailored to the students they teach. As Lord Russell highlighted, we want and need to ensure schools bring parents on board when they implement restrictions on the use of mobile phones. We want to encourage schools to consult with and build support from parents to develop a policy that works in context at home and at school. Through schools articulating a clear stance on mobile phone use and the risk posed by social media, many parents may feel prompted to give further consideration to how children and young people are using mobile phones out of school too. In terms of tech companies, of which I have a great deal to discuss, I think, based on Noble Lord's contributions, while the existing guidance from the DFE does an effective job in empowering schools to prohibit the use of mobile phones in their own classroom, protecting children does not stop at the school gates. The Online Safety Act takes a zero-tolerance approach to the protection of children and ensures platforms are held responsible for the content they host. All companies in scope need to take robust steps to protect children from illegal, inappropriate and harmful content and activity. Many lords asked about the role of technology. My lords, the role of technology for learning is key. I visited two schools last week, and two primary schools last week, and iPads were being used in nearly every classroom. And beyond me, they were coding games and working. It was Friday afternoon. I understand that on a Friday afternoon, what used to be playtime in my world, and when I was at school, is now coding time. I think I had it easier than children as they are developing. That the benefits of technology can be broader than improve learning outcomes. Schools and colleges can use technology to increase the accessibility of the curriculum and to increase student and parental engagement, which is what I saw last week. With regard to safeguarding and improving mental health more widely, whilst often raised in the context of social media, children's mental health and well-being are shaped by a complex range of risk and protective factors. These span individual level factors such as those linked to an individual's overall health and abilities, and for example, exposure to adversely and traumatic events. Familial and community level factors also play a part, including quality of parental and peer relationships, influenced through wider experiences at home and school. So too, overall environmental factors spanning the physical environment, things like housing, access to green spaces, as well as societal factors, including stigma and discrimination. The evidence suggests a list of factors longer still than these examples. The government is committed to improving mental health support for all children and young people. This is critical to breaking down barriers to opportunity and spans a wide range of public services, health, welfare, education and beyond. We know that children and young people can struggle for access support for their mental health. We have committed to providing access to specialist mental health provisions in every school in England. We will also be putting in place open access youth future hubs in every community, including access to mental health support workers, and we will recruit 8,500 new mental health workers to treat children and adults. I want to thank my noble friend Baroness Gowdy and Baroness Owen for highlighting the gender division on some of these issues. The government has a clear mission to halve violence against women and girls. That's offline and online. We are taking this very, very seriously on a cross-departmental level, working with nations and regions, as you'd expect me to say, to deliver this mission, and I look forward to working with all noble lords on delivering it. Baroness Thornhill raised the mental health impact of phones in schools. All state schools and colleges have been offered a grant to train a senior mental health lead by 2025. Up to the 31st of August 24, 17,100 schools and colleges had successfully claimed a grant. The 17,100 settings that have claimed a grant up to that date represent 72% of the total number of settings. Baroness Cass raised the issue of screen time. Through statutory relationship, sex and health education, pupils are taught about the benefits of rationing time spent online, the risks of excessive time spent on electronic devices, and the impact of positive and negative content online on their own and others' mental and physical well-being. Following on from the issues raised by Baroness Gowdy, Baroness Owen and Baroness Grenda with relation to the different impact between boys and girls, we are focused on building the evidence base to inform any future action, and DSIT has launched a research project looking at the links between social media and children's well-being. I will speak to them for an update on how we're recording the impact on girls. With regards to addictive technology, which was raised by Lord Chartres, the child safety duties under the Online Safety Act apply across all areas of the service, including its functionalities and the way in which it is operated and used by children, as well as content present at the service. If a provider's risk assessment identifies that habit-forming or addictive behaviour is an activity which risks causing significant harm to an appreciable number of children on their service, then providers must take appropriate steps to manage and mitigate these risks. Baroness Grenda and others, including the Earl of Effingham, reference what's happened today in Australia. We are monitoring the legislative developments and will use the UK-Australia MOU to share evidence and try and learn from each other's approaches towards this issue. My Lords, time is short and I was asked about victims of crime. I will write because it's a very long answer I have on victims of crime, so I will write about victims of crime. In conclusion, my Lords, we can do more to protect children and young people from risk of harm online and on social media when they walk out of the school gates. We've been clear that the government's priority is the effective implementation of the Online Safety Act so that children can benefit from its wide-ranging protections as soon as possible and be able to safely benefit from technological advances for years to come. Baroness Kidron raised the fact that I was responding. Actually, the person with responsibility for this policy area is a minister in the other place, Stephen Morgan, and I will arrange for Baroness Kidron to meet with Stephen Morgan to discuss these issues in more detail. In closing, I'd like to repeat my thanks to the noble lady, Baroness Kidron, for bringing forward this debate. I appreciate there are some issues that I didn't touch on, including the Children's Commissioner survey, but I will write to noble lords about specific points I have not been able to respond to.
I thank the noble lady, the Minister, and particularly for agreeing to arrange a meeting with the Minister from the other place. And I do thank all noble lords, but I'm going to use the little bit of time I have to just respond on a couple of issues, and I hope you will forgive me for that, because I'm rather disappointed because the noble lady set out quite a lot of stats that showed the problem and then said, but we've got it covered. And I think that that is not the feeling of the House, and it is not the feeling of the evidence, that actually it cannot be the case that on the one hand, you know, the number of children who say that the guidance isn't working, and on the other hand, that we have the guidance and the guidance is enough. So I felt that there were a number of things of that ilk, and I will write to the noble lady to point them out precisely and not take everybody's time right now. But I did really want to make very clear that the vast majority of Lords in the debate are talking about restrictions, not bans, in school, not in general. I know there are those who go a little wider, but in general, that was the mood of the House. I don't think anybody, any noble lord who spoke, and certainly speaking on my own behalf, is a tech detractor. There is a better world than this, a better world where technology is designed to take care of our children. And the one point of information that I was absolutely delighted to hear is that the noble lady thinks the OSA actually deals with addiction. I've had quite a lot of toing and froing with Ofcom. They don't seem to think so. So I would really love to interrogate that with her, with Ofcom, and just leave my final word for a young child who said, I don't get why everyone's so upset. We're not allowed to take pets or frisbees into class. Why are we allowed to take phones?
This motion be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion shall say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My lords, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn.
The House do now adjourn.